Before I get into my talk here today, my name is Dave, if you don't know who I am, and I'm one of the pastors here. And we are trying to make Mother's Day extra special this coming year. And as you can see, there's 5 families in this photo, and I believe 2 of these families are newly adopted children. Every single family that's represented here is an adoption family, and this Mother's Day we want to make um, their Mother's Day extra special. So after service today, Mary, she was sitting right there. We're going to have a meeting right up here in the front, and we're just calling an all hands on deck type of moment. We have these care packages that we just want to send to them, just to bless them, love them, and honor them for what they've done. And so, if you guys can be a part of it, the task is that we need to reach Carlstadt to West Milford. And so, if you guys would like to be a part of just what God is doing there, we invite you into that. We're going to have some more announcements afterwards for that. So just wanted to give you guys a heads up as we get into that. Today we're going to be finalizing our series on life after death. We're talking about everything from heaven and hell. And I thought it would be appropriate to end our series by actually not talking about heaven at all. So let's get into this. The passage is 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 12 to 1 through 10. And Paul says this. He says, I must go on boasting. Although there is nothing to be gained, I will go on to visions and revelations from the Lord. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up in the third heaven. Whether it was in body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And I know that this man, whether in body or apart from the body, I do not know, but God knows, was caught up to paradise, he's talking about heaven, and heard inexpressible things that no one is permitted to tell. I will boast about a man like that, but I will not boast about myself except about my weakness. If you've been following along, you will know that heaven is a relational reality. And what I mean by that is that when we think about heaven, oftentimes we think of it in the context of a place. But really, heaven has to be looked at in the context of a person. If you don't love Jesus or like him, heaven will be hell to you. Because every square inch of heaven, every moment in heaven, every nook and cranny of heaven is a reflection of one man, and that's Jesus. You see, heaven is about the who, not necessarily the where. And if you were here last week and the past couple of weeks, we talk about over and over again that heaven is a relational reality, not just a spatial one. It's not just about a place, but it's about a person. And God's promise to us is not a place, but a person. 25 times you're going to see in Scripture God promising from the Old Testament to the New, from Abraham to Jesus, his promise is that he's with us. He doesn't just give us a place. He doesn't just give us an object. He says, I will be with you. So the essence of true humanity, what true humanity looks like, is when we have a deep emphasis of the who over the where. I mentioned this last week, but a place can never love on you. It can never touch you. It can never reach into the depth of who you are the way a person can. Jesus did not come back like a Hawaiian island on vacation. Jesus came back as a person, as a being, because he knew that it would take a person to reach the depth of who we are, not a place. But unfortunately, what we've done is we've had an overemphasis and a disproportionate emphasis of the where, of the place, over the who. And that we do that in life all the time. We're so concerned about where we are in life and our place in life that we miss out on just who God is trying to give us. And so what I call this, and what we called this last week, is the subhuman trap. It's a subhuman trap. And what I mean by that is that anything that's less than the true essence of your humanity, anytime you put a where over the who, you are entering into the subhuman trap. You're falling for it. That anytime we emphasize our place in life over the person in our life, we are falling into a subhuman trap. Today, I'm going to be talking about the second subhuman trap. And it's not just the where, but it's the what. Anytime we place a what over the who, we are falling into the second subhuman trap. So you're going to hear me say what a lot. And I'm going to say what's over and over and over again. But as you guys can tell, I hope you guys will follow along with me. Similar to last week, what? A what is, by definition, for the purposes of this message, is any condition, community, or characteristic that causes one to say, this blank makes me me. You could fill in that blank with whatever you want. This very thing is what makes me me. And oftentimes, we can fill that space with our career, our vocation. The what's in our life are anything from our own children, our spouses, our parents. It could be even our education and our degrees. It could be our race and our gender. It could be a sport or a sports team. It can be an activity. It could even be a diet. And if you want to get spiritual, we could even look at it as a calling or purpose in life. Or it could even just be an internal focus. A what can be your mental health, self-improvement, a pursuit of inner peace and development. We all have a what. And I'm not trying to condemn the what's, but what I'm saying is anytime we live for the what, we are living a subhuman living. You see, the what's in our life, like think about it this way. Think IG profile. Instagram profile, right? When you look at Instagram profiles, it'll say anything like mom, dad, husband, pastor, influencer, right? It could say like yogi, CrossFitter, something, football player, whatever. It could be whatever you want, but think IG profile. That's the what's in our life. And the algorithms of our life have been shaped and designed so that it can cater to the what and the algorithm that we live by, right? And so when it comes to our what's, it's any condition, community, or characteristic or camp that we sit in that says, this makes me me. This is who I am. And this starts at an early age. You know, my kids, barely 12 years old, they already came up to me a couple years ago and they said, Daddy, what do you think my thing is? And I'm like, thing? I don't know what's your thing. And they're like, everyone has a thing, and I want to know what my thing is. I said, I don't know, Jesus. And they're like, oh, that's not good enough. I said, what? Excuse me? You see, everyone from an early age, they're trying to find their thing, their what. It makes them feel special. It makes us feel we belong. It makes us feel like we have a camp, a community, or condition that says, this makes me me. But I want to argue here that whenever we live like this, we're living in the subhuman reality of that trap. It's a subhuman existence. Because the what's in our life can never touch the depth of who we are. It can never satisfy us on a deep level. It can never touch you, love on you, serve you the way a person can. However, like we've done with the wheres, we've done the same thing with the what. We've elevated the what's in our lives. Thinking that if we can attain that, thinking that if we can have that, thinking that if we can belong to a certain what, that'll make us feel safe, secure, and feel like, you know what, that's who I am. That's me. But that's subhuman living, because it can never satisfy you. Jesus did not come in the form of a what. He came in the form of a who. And a what was never made to touch the depth of who you are. Only a person can. But we've reduced people and interactions to subhuman living, right? The first 30 seconds you have with any conversation with anyone new, what's one of the first questions that you ask them or get asked? So what do you do? Right? We've fallen into that subhuman trap. And this is kind of a side note. We have a false assumption that interesting jobs make interesting people. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Right? It's like, have you guys ever watched The Crown? Yeah? It's a good show, kind of long. But there was a moment where Prince Philip, he saw Apollo 11 go into space and land on the moon, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. And he was so excited to meet these young astronauts because he thought, you know what, I just need to get a taste of what it was like. But when he met with them, if you see the scene, it was so uninteresting, so boring. That's literally what he said. He said, these men were so bland. So mild. They talked about their journey into space and on the moon like they were tired all the time. They were exhausted. They were just crunching numbers. They didn't really get to enjoy it. We have this false assumption that interesting jobs make interesting people. That's where we are in life. We treat everyone with a subhuman reality. Some of the most interesting people I've ever met in my life have the most boring and uninteresting jobs. But that's what we do. We subjugate people to subhuman living. And we define each other by the what's in our lives. What do we have? What's our title? What we've achieved? And we think that's the summation of our humanity, but it's not. That's just subhuman living. A what can never satisfy you the way a who can. And Jesus never came in the form of a what, he came in the form of a who. So getting to the passage, in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, we're going to look at kind of like the whole of 2 Corinthians chapter 10 to 12. I won't read all of it for you, but we're going to kind of look at what's going on with Paul in the story. And just to give you guys some context of the passage that we read today, Paul wrote 2 letters to the Corinthians. There was a church in Corinth that he planted, and he wrote 2 letters. The first letter was about unity in the church. There was a lot of division that was happening, and so he just was writing that letter to encourage them to be unified, to be one together. The second letter is really different. It's not about unity with the church, within the church, but it was about unity with him. You see, what ended up happening was people were challenging Paul's authority and his leadership. People were undermining his work because they were claiming that his suffering proved that he was not a true apostle. It's kind of like that fake idea that we think that when God comes into our life that everything's going to get better. They fell into that trap too. They said, look at all the suffering that Paul is experiencing. He's clearly not a true apostle, because if he was a true apostle, his life would be great. His life would be amazing. All the what's in his life would be all lined up like ducks in an order and doing really, really well. No. We talked about this in men's group, Ron, right? We talked about this in men's group, that when we became Christian, our life kind of actually became harder. And the reason why is because before you became a Christian, you only had one enemy, and that was God. And he's gracious and kind, and all he wants to do is just have you come into his household. But now after being a Christian, you have 3 enemies. That's the world, that's the devil himself, and that's even your own flesh, that you are an enemy to yourself now. So of course it's going to get a little harder. Of course that's the challenge that we take up. And so Paul's opponents were undermining Paul's work, saying, because of his life, look at the what's in his life. He's clearly not an apostle. He's not a super apostle. But in 2 Corinthians 10 to 12, these 3 chapters, Paul's defending his legitimacy as an apostle in the Christian faith. He's defending his authority, his God-given authority. And ultimately what ends up happening is that Paul, he's forced now to talk about his what. In the beginning, when he went to the Corinthians, he makes it very clear, I did not want to talk about my what, because I didn't want to come to you in boasting, in bragging. I didn't want to talk about all the things that I've accomplished. But because you are forcing me into this corner, now I have to talk about it. That is the context of 2 Corinthians 10 to chapter 12. Paul, he says this, look. In this self-confident boasting, I am not talking as the Lord would, but as a fool. Since many are boasting in the way that the world does, I too will boast. Paul's basically saying, because you guys want me to boast, I'll boast. I'll talk about my what. And this is Paul's what's. Apostle Paul, 1 through 7 here. In chapter 10, he talks about his apostolic authority, the authority that God given him to lead and to plant churches all around where he was at. Second, he talks about his legitimate Jewish heritage, his bloodline. It says that that people question him. Is he even a real descendant of Abraham? Does he have Jewish blood? And Paul, he's defending himself by saying, I am a legitimate Jew. Third, he talks about his knowledge. He says, I have brains. I'm smart. I actually know what I'm talking about. He says, although he says, I may not be the best public speaker, I do know what I'm talking about. I have knowledge. From verses 16 to 30 in chapter 11, Paul talks about his suffering, how he was beaten for the sake of Christ. Fifth, he talks about demonstrations of power, that he was experiencing signs and miracles right in front of him. And sixth, that he was a mouthpiece for Christ. And seventh, which is the passage that we read, that he himself experienced heaven. In the passage, he talks about another man. He talks about himself in third person, but really it's because he wanted to be extra humble in that moment. And because of the whats his opponents are looking for, because of the things that his opponents are looking for, Paul is claiming that they're allowing themselves to be subjugated as subhumans. Look, Paul, he says this to them. He says, "You gladly put up with fools since you are so wise." He's exaggerating. In fact, you even put up with anyone who enslaves you or exploits you or takes advantage of you or puts on airs or slaps you in the face. To my shame, I admit that we were too weak for that. What's Paul saying? He's saying, you guys want to live in the subhuman reality. You guys want all this braggadocious stuff. You guys want the boasting. You guys want all of it. So, since you want it, I'll do it. And so that's what he does. He talks about all this stuff. Not because he wants to, but because he's defending his legitimacy as a Christian apostle. Paul's saying, you want strength, a show of strength? I can show you strength. He's saying, you want me to walk tall, bold, and confident and powerful? I can do that. And if anything, he'll terrify you. He's saying, you're not impressed with my what? Let me show you what my what is. And he talks about his gigantic resume. And he has to defend himself. I do not think I'm in the least inferior to these super apostles. He's saying, I don't think I have less than them. That's not my own translation. Every translation says super apostles. That was a thing back then. Apparently, there were people that were considered to be super apostles, extra holy, that they would walk into a room and you could feel their charisma and bravado. You could feel their oomph, that they got the extra stuff and the extra juice. You know the kind of persons that I'm talking about. That's what the super apostles were. Apostle Paul was not like that whatsoever. He intentionally walked in humble. He walked in gentle. He walked in with meekness. And Paul, he's basically saying, I do have all the what that you're looking for. He's confident. He's honest. He's like, I got it. I got it. But I have another what that supersedes all of that. I have another thing. That's my actual thing. You think that list of 7 stuff, you think that would be a thing. And in any lifetime, that would be enough. But Paul says, that's not my thing. Let me tell you my thing. If I must boast, I will boast of all the things that show my weakness. He doesn't say, my experience in heaven is my thing. Think about that if that were to happen now. It has happened now. And what do people do? They start podcasts. They get book deals. They get asked to speak all over the country. They become the heaven guy, right? If you have knowledge, you become the smart guy, right? You get asked to talk about weird, smart things. I don't know. Obviously, you guys can tell my brain, right? You could if there's a heaven guy, there's the smart guy, there's the miracles guy. Any one of those things on that list could have been his thing. But Paul, he says, if I'm going to boast about anything, if I'm going to brag about anything, it's not going to be my shows of strength. It's going to be my weakness. That, Paul says, is my thing. My weakness is my what? You think it's my strength that will demonstrate Christ. You think it's my skill, my gifts, my preaching. You think it's my impressiveness. You think it's my holiness. You think it's my super apostolic bravado. No, it's going to be my weakness that's going to demonstrate Jesus. Paul, he even says, I even experienced heaven. I saw it for myself. But Paul didn't lead with that. That was the seventh thing on his list. Imagine that. That's like, when you're talking about your Christian resume, that's like the seventh thing. Like you actually encountering heaven is the seventh thing on your list to show that you are a Christian. He doesn't lead with that. He could have been the heaven guy and had a podcast called The Heaven Guy, written a book called The Heaven Guy, could have had a series of teachings called The Heaven Guy, could write in his Instagram profile, The Heaven Guy. But no. He says, I'm the weak guy. I'm the nothing guy. Paul says, my what is my weakness. And the reason is because my what points to my who. You see, Paul, he doesn't look down on the what. Kind of like how Jesus doesn't look down on the where either. We don't condemn the what. We don't condemn nice things. That's not the point. The point is that does your what, does your thing point to your who? Does your thing, your what, does it point to Jesus? Look, even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool because I would be speaking the truth, but I refrain, so no one will think more of me than is warranted by what I do or say, or because of these surpassingly great revelations. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan, to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, Paul says, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am, let's all together, I'm strong. Think about that. Paul's what? He says is my weakness. Not just like a random weakness, like a true blue weakness. Not the kind of weaknesses that you talk about in your interviews, like Michael Scott, that you work too hard and that you give too much. No, I'm not talking about those kind of like genuine weakness. Paul, he says, my what? My thing is that I'm weak. But when I am weak, for some reason, Christ's power becomes perfect. When I am weak, for some reason, Christ chooses to demonstrate himself. Christ chooses to show himself when I am weak. He says, it's my weakness that shows Christ's strength. And so since when I am the weakest, when I have not all the what's in line, when I have in my moments of weakness and Christ makes himself perfect, that's my thing. Because every time I walk into my weakness, be honest with it, embrace it, for some reason, Christ becomes perfect. God is, in essence, attracted to your weakness. Didn't seem like you guys heard that part. Let me say it again. God is attracted to your weakness. Amen, right? Thank God. If your weakness is your what, then God has room to move in your life. This is the what, the kind of what that God is looking for. He's not looking for your strength, your charisma. He's not looking for just the things that you think make you, you. He's looking for those areas, those weaknesses, those downfalls, those addictions, those thought patterns. He's looking for those things that you're not proud of, those things that you feel like hold you back, the things that you wish you could bury. and not have it be a part of your story. I say this all the time, but we all have a story that we wish we never lived. Paul and Jesus are saying, that's the part of your life that I'm attracted to. Let's pause right there in that moment. That's what I want to see. That's where I enter. You think God meets us in our strength? You think people raising their hand here, they do it because they're so holy? Because we have strength? Because we're righteous? No. It's because we have nothing. It's because we ourselves are weak, and we're just inviting God's strength to be made perfect in our lives. The thing that you're trying to bury, the thing that you're trying to hide, the thing that you are most embarrassed and shameful of, God most likely says that's the thing that I'm attracted to. That's the thing that God can redeem. I've even noticed that the ones who feel the farthest from God are oftentimes the ones who are trying to be the strongest. But the ones who are the nearest are the ones who've embraced, thank you. I try to put good stuff, not bad stuff. The ones that feel farthest from God are oftentimes the ones that are trying to do it in their own strength. But when you've become yielded, when you embrace the weak, when you allow yourselves to be vulnerable before God, and that word vulnerability, that word essentially means that you're allowing yourselves to get hurt. You're giving an opportunity to allow yourselves to get hurt. But in your vulnerability, that's where God meets us. It's your weakness that God is attracted to. Your strengths and your gifts, God's like, I already gave you that. You just do it, right? We have so many profiles and strengths finders and spiritual gifts tests out. Like everyone's trying to find their thing. We have like Enneagram assessments and Myers-Briggs and stuff because everyone's just trying to find their thing. Paul's profile would literally just say weak. W-E-A-K. That's my Myers-Briggs. My Enneagram is W-E-A-K, weak. My resume says weak. My what is my weakness? The thing that I'm trying to bury, the thing that I'm trying to hide, that's where God is trying to meet us. This is the kind of what that God is looking for. So how do we invite Jesus into your weakness? First, be honest. Be honest with yourselves and stop trying to be like Michael Scott in an interview. I work too hard. I give too much. No, that's not the weakness that we're talking about. A weakness that's covered up as a strength. Be honest with your weaknesses. Second, learn to actually boast in it. Learn to boast. You know, I've had 2 phone calls this past week where I had to lead with me saying, hey, Musala, just letting you know, I'm like really horrific at like getting things done. So I need your help in this area. And before, I wouldn't lead with that. I would try to do it myself, try to get things done. But then I realized, you know what? I'm going to embrace this. I'm going to let God meet me in this weakness. And I had to just let myself be honest and actually learn how to boast in it. And second, let Jesus work through it. Oftentimes, we don't let God work through our lives. We don't give him enough of a chance, a moment for him to work through our weakness because we're just trying to be strong. Some of us are wondering, why isn't God working in my life? Well, maybe, just maybe, you're just putting up too much strength here. Maybe you're just trying to be too strong in this moment, trying to carry too much, trying to be too much, trying to fill up your resume with all the what's in your life so that you can look respectable, loved, and accepted. We have to be honest with our weakness. We have to learn to boast in it. We have to let Jesus work through it. Does your what lead to the person of Jesus? Does your thing demonstrate Jesus' power and his strength? And like I said, the ones who I notice feel like they're the farthest from God are the ones that are just trying to be too strong. But the ones that are the closest to him, the nearest to him, are the ones that are actually the weakest. I'm going to close with this. Praise team, you guys can start making your way up here. This past week, I had a meeting with a man who um, who he himself experienced heaven. I met Ken at Donna and Josh's wedding, and he was telling me a little bit about his experience of life after death. Just to give you guys some background about this, my new friend Ken, throughout his whole life, even before he became a Christian, he experienced just miracles after miracles. He said one time when he was in his early 20s, he went tobogganing. Guess that's a thing back then. He went tobogganing, and he said he hit his back on a rock while he was tobogganing, and there was a baseball-sized lump, contusion, in his back. And he could barely walk, and he barely made it to his friend's house. But his friend and his mother laid hands on that contusion, and they prayed it. And he said that he could feel their hands just press down on it, and he experienced healing. He said one time he was even in and so that in itself can be, the healing guy, the healed guy. That's his what? Another time he was in a prayer meeting by himself. And he said that while he was in that prayer meeting, all of a sudden he started smelling fresh bread. See, that's how you know God doesn't do keto. He smelled fresh bread, right? Or carnivore, whatever, paleo, whatever works with you. He smelled fresh bread. And then all of a sudden in that same prayer meeting, he smelled fresh flowers. So you think he could be the smelling guy. He smells God. That's how I'm convinced God has a certain scent. And I want to know what it smells like. That's going to be my first question to God. God, come here. All right. I knew it. God has a scent. So he could be the smelling guy. Oh, he could smell God's presence. That could be his what? But then when he was 50, he had a stroke. He had a stroke at work. And while he was at work, he had just enough time to call his coworker and tell him that he had a stroke. And as he was stroking out, he just said he just knew it. He's like, I just knew it. I was having a stroke in that moment. And as he was stroking out, all of a sudden, his breathing stopped. And he said, well, I guess it's time. When your breathing goes, you go. And he said, in that moment, it was instant. He said, I felt like I was being transported. And as I was being transported, it felt like the burden of the world was lifting off of my shoulders. He said, as I was going to heaven, I didn't get to the actual destination, but as he was going, he felt peace. And he wasn't, even as that was happening, he said he wasn't sure if he was going which direction. But he just said, God, I believe you are righteous, you are just, and I believe that you'll make a fair assessment. That just goes to show the kind of relationship that he had with God. And as he was being transported, he said, I was feeling like I was going at 100 miles, 1,000,000 miles an hour. And I just knew I was being transported somewhere. And he said, I was still me. I was still me. He said, I knew I didn't become an animal. I didn't become an object. I was still me. But then all of a sudden, he felt thumping on his chest. And all of a sudden, the transportation stopped. And he came back. And he slowly woke up to an EMT just pounding his chest, bringing him back to life. And you know what his first thought was? He said, oh man, I'm back. That's how I'm convinced that Paul talked about departing all the time, because he experienced it. He said, oh my, I'm back. He's like, I was about to taste fresh bread, man. I was getting there. He's like, it felt like, I asked him, wow, what did it feel like to have to feel so light? He's like, imagine 1,000 elephants just being lifted off of you. That's what it feels like to be a part of this world. He's like, and I felt it. And even just feeling that was enough. And I wanted to feel that again. So look at that. Now he's the heaven guy. He was the healing guy. He was the smelling guy. But now he's the heaven guy. And I'm sitting there as a young man just taking in all these stories, trying to listen to him, just being like, man, this guy experienced a lot. And at the end of the conversation, as he's about to get up, I say, hey, Ken, do you mind if you pray for me? And he just looked at me. He's like, for what? And I'm like, I don't know. You're the heaven guy. You're the healing guy. You're the smelling guy. Like, just give me an impartation. Just give me something, man. And then he sat down and he's just like, Dave. He picked up a French fry. He's like, everything that's in this French fry, I'm nothing more than what's in here. He's like, what I have is nothing. What I have is nothing. He said, all I have is Jesus and his love in me. And if you want that impartation, I'll give that to you. I'll pray that for you. But all the other stuff, I'm just a French fry. And he said this is my favorite quote. After all the healing, after all the smelling, after all the heaven, he says this, Dave, the greatest miracle is that Jesus is alive in us. And that's the only thing that I can give you. I think when you experience heaven, you're not just like, Lord, give me more of that bread. You're like, Jesus, you're amazing. Jesus, the greatest miracle is not that I can smell fresh bread. It's not that I can touch heaven. It's not that I got healed and that I'm a healer and have been healed. The greatest miracle is that Jesus, you're alive in us. And that's all we got. Paul's what was his weakness. Why? Because it always pointed towards Christ. Some of us are trying to find the what's in our lives. Trying to fill our IG profile or your work resume with all the what's. And even some of you trying to fill your spiritual resume with all the what's that can make you the heaven guy, the healing guy, the smart guy, the rich guy, the good-looking guy, the smart girl, right? Whatever. Paul's like, none of that. The only miracle that I have, the greatest miracle that I have, is that Jesus is alive in me. And today, the greatest miracle that you could walk into is Jesus being alive here. You're looking for the what's. Paul, he says, all I have is Jesus. So in this moment, if you can just close your eyes with me. Let's take a moment. And everything in this world is going to have you searching for the what. And there's going to be people on the internet that are going to tell you how to have better what's and how to fill your what's. There's going to be people in your life that are going to try to teach you how to get your thing and to be your thing. But Paul, he shows us the only thing that I have is my weakness. And my weakness is my thing because it points to Christ. And that Christ being alive in you is the greatest thing, the greatest miracle that anyone can have. So if Christ is alive in you today, amen. Can you just give yourselves a round of applause? You have walked into the greatest miracle. And if he's not, you have the opportunity to not be defined by these subhuman, superficial what's in this life, but to be defined by the greatest one, which is the person of Jesus. So if you can, let's rise and let's worship. Let's give him the glory because he deserves it.